The presentation of anarchism as social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
Anarchism, Anti-imperialism, and the British Empire, read by Eleanor Strangways. In 1940, Albert Meltzer, a key figure within mid-20th century British anarchism, stood before a tribunal set up for conscientious objectors to argue his case for opposition to the war. Support for this war, he began, and service in any capacity, whether military or non-combatant, would be for me not only an intolerable compromise to the forces of capitalism and the state, but a radical betrayal of the international working class. His defence of his anarchist position regarding the Second World War drew heavily on Britain's imperial role. I believe the working class of Britain can only achieve its freedom by fighting its own capitalist class on the economic field, by forcing it to grant social and wage concessions, and by joining with the colonial peoples to end imperialism. I have decided myself, in the tribunal of my own reason, that I will not support imperialist war. I do not want to see a victory for Nazism, for Bolshevism, or for imperialism. Alongside other anarchists, Meltzer's appeal was rejected on the grounds that pacifism was not at the heart of his objection. The intersection between anarchism and anti-imperialism during the Second World War will be the focus of today's talk. I'll begin by examining war commentary, exploring its context and situating it within the broader landscape of anti-war and anti-imperial positions in Britain during the Second World War. Following this, we will consider the involvement of anti-imperialists in anarchist spaces and publications, focusing on figures such as George Padmore, Jomo Kenyatta, and Chris Jones. The British anarchist movement was almost entirely anti-war during the Second World War, except for a handful of Spanish exiles who believed that the defeat of Hitler could also bring about the defeat of Franco. War commentary was founded in 1939 by the anarchists associated with freedom, superseding Spain and the World that had been published throughout the duration of the Spanish Civil War. War commentary ran between 1939 and 1945 and formed part of the minority of publications in opposition to the Second World War that otherwise included the publications of the Peace Pledge Union, the Socialist Party of Great Britain, and the Independent Labour Party. Whilst the Communist Party of Great Britain changed its position twice on support for the war effort, once in 1939 after the Nazi-Soviet Pact had been signed, and a second time in 1941 with the entry of the Soviet Union into the war, war commentary maintained an anti-war position throughout the Second World War. The paper brought together a diverse range of perspectives, including revolutionary anarchists often linked to anarcho-syndicalism such as Tom Brown and Albert Meltzer, and those who would later be associated with more gradualist anarchism like George Woodcock. After the Second World War, these perspectives, which had been united in war commentary, became fragmented into different groups. An anti-war stance was in a minority in Britain at the time of the declaration of the war. In his study of pacifism, Martin Seidel demonstrates that mass resignations took place in the British pacifist movement, especially after the German military breakthrough in the spring of 1940, which proved a watershed for pacifism. Leading figures of British pacifism, including Bertrand Russell, left the movement, and other non-pacifists like George Orwell accused those of remaining as being part of pro-Hitler organisations. Similarly, the German anarchist Rudolf Rocker, best known for his works Nationalism and Culture, published in 1937, and Anarcho-Syndicalism, Theory and Practice, published in 1938, defended supporting the Allies in his article Order of the Hour, which was published in 1941. In this article, he argued that the war transcended conventional military conflicts due to the totalitarian nature of the Third Reich. He concluded the article by stating, "To assert that to us it is all the same who is victor in this terrible conflict means to aid the cowardly murderers and to prepare the world for the blessing of Hitler's new order." For this talk, it's also important to understand the context and position of anti-imperialists in Britain at the time. In the decades preceding the Second World War, Britain witnessed a surge in anti-imperialist activism, led by intellectuals and activists from Africa and the Caribbean. The West African Students' Union, established in 1925, emerged as a prominent anti-imperial organisation in Britain, challenging colonial racism, advocating for self-governance, and building alliances with various British political organisations. Campaigns such as those supporting the Scottsboro Boys in 1931, and activism surrounding the Italian invasion of Ethiopia in 1935, intensified anti-colonial organising in Britain and built alliances between black activists and radical political organisations in Britain. Within anti-imperialist groups, there was also factionalism around their position on the Second World War. The West African Students' Union in Britain pledged their allegiance to the Allies during the war and created an amicable relationship with the Colonial Office whilst continually pressing for reforms. Conversely, during the war, the International African Service Bureau, a Pan-African organisation that had been founded in March 1937, challenged the dominant rhetoric around democracy versus fascism, putting forward an alternative thesis. The war was, in fact, about who controlled the colonial world. Actors within this organisation, such as Chris Braithwaite and George Padmore, who will both be discussed in this talk, became central to the dissemination of anti-conscription propaganda. Amidst these divisions within anti-war anarchist and anti-imperial movements, imperialism became a key focal point for war opposition. The centrality of anti-imperialism in British anarchism was made clear when they reprinted George Padmore's Manifesto Against War in September 1938. Padmore was a Trinidadian and became an important transnational figure in the anti-imperial movement. While studying in the United States in the 1920s, he became attracted to communism and worked closely with the Comintern in the late 1920s and early 1930s. He resigned from the Comintern in 1933 and later became a critic of Soviet communism, particularly through the publication Pan-Africanism or Communism, published in 1956. During the war, he was one of the few anti-imperialist figures who stayed in London, refusing any form of employment that supported the war effort. He informed the Ministry of Labour that his refusal was based on his determination not to aid in the continuation of the British Empire. His text, published in Spain and the World in September 1938, began with, "To Africans, people of African descent, and colonial peoples all over the world, you, the most oppressed and exploited, will soon be called upon to take part in a war which threatens to slaughter millions of men, women, and children, and bring ruin, misery, and devastation on a scale unheard of before." This text called for independence and solidarity among populations of colonised countries, rejecting the rhetoric of fighting fascism in the name of democracy, and can be understood as an antecedent of the position British anarchists took regarding the war and the ways that this intertwined with imperialism. Padmore's manifesto emphasises three key points that were highlighted consistently in war commentary during the period 1939 to 1945. One, that they understood the Second World War as an imperialist war. Two, that parallels could be drawn between fascism and so-called democratic imperialism. And three, that to support the war would be to support the continuation of the British Empire. Anti-imperialism was thus central to anarchist opposition to the war during this period. Within the paper, a manifesto entitled "What Anarchists Stand For" was frequently published and insisted we oppose the war as the outcome of the clashing interests of rival imperialisms. Similarly, a response to Rudolf Rocker was published in 1942, stating imperialism, the reign and exploitation of countries outside of a given country's domain, plays perhaps the most important role in the manifold causes of the present war. Similarly, an article titled "Our Policy in Brief" stated we are against the war because we are opposed to the governments now at war with each other, because the war is caused by conflicting commercial interests and imperial desires. Imperialism was thus at the heart of the anarchist rejection of the Second World War. This position was greatly informed by anti-imperialist writers. We have already mentioned the publication of George Padmore. However, in 1941, an article titled "How Kenya is Governed" was published. The article was written by Kenyan nationalist Jomo Kenyatta, who was part of a small and select group of prominent anti-imperialists living in London in the late 1920s and 30s, who were closely associated with various groups of the British left during these years. Kenyatta was one of the few anti-imperialists who stayed in the UK during the war, working on a farm in Storrington in Sussex. What has been sidelined in the literature on Kenyatta is that he also attended anarchist meetings in the 1930s. In Albert Meltzer's description of these meetings, he recalls that Kenyatta would often turn up to anarchist meetings, announcing he would one day go back and become the Kikuyu chief in Kenya. Though dismissed somewhat sarcastically in Meltzer's description, Kenyatta did of course later become the first president of independent Kenya. In How Kenya is Governed, Kenyatta illustrates the injustices happening under British colonial rule in Kenya, including the expropriation of land by white settlers, the taxation system, and the authoritarian rule of the governor, using these examples to demonstrate, I quote, the kind of democracy which Mr. Winston Churchill and his Labour Party colleagues ask us to defend. While anti-imperialists like Kenyatta and Padmore contributed to a range of British left publications during their time in Britain, their collaboration with War Commentary underscores its significance as a platform for challenging imperialism and fostering sustained interaction between anarchists and imperialists. Descriptions similar to Kenyatta's article frequently appeared in War Commentary, which published more than 50 articles on imperialism over the course of the war years. These articles were primarily anonymous, a common tactic among activists from the colonies, especially those publishing within the colonies, to avoid charges of libel, defamation, or sedition. And they offered meticulous accounts of conditions in Africa. For instance, in an article titled The Black Man's Burden, the author sheds light on the plight of the Bantu population in South Africa, lamenting that they were denied access to decently paid work and to the land which is theirs by right. Similarly, another piece depicted the hardships faced in Nigeria, highlighting government taxation, the formation of unfair buying agreements by European firms, and oppressive legislation, questioning the defence of the British Empire through these stark portrayals of colonial conditions. Although the authors of these articles remained anonymous, making it unclear whether they were direct witnesses from the colonies or British anarchists piecing together reports from the press, it is evident that anarchists were sometimes drawing on first-hand accounts from colonial correspondence. When Vernon Richards was arrested in 1945, Richards' confiscated briefcase revealed correspondence with a writer in Sierra Leone, requesting information about the colonial administration for publication in War Commentary. Evidence from this correspondence, alongside the article written by Kenyatta and reprinting of Padmore, suggests the significant role anti-imperialists played in providing insight into colonial conditions for anarchist publications during this period. During the war, anti-imperialists also played a key role at anarchist gatherings. On the 4th of May 1941, a public meeting was held with the main writers of War Commentary, such as Ethel Mannon and F.A. Ridley, taking to the stage. Among the speakers was Chris Braithwaite, mainly known by his pseudonym Chris Jones, a Barbadian activist and organiser. Braithwaite was a key figure in trade union organisation in interwar Britain. Similarly to Padmore, he'd been involved in the Communist Party but had resigned in 1933 due to the party's sidelining of support for anti-colonial struggles. During the 1941 rally, Braithwaite described the exploitation of black workers in South African copper mines, in Barbados sugar plantations, and in the London docks. Through these descriptions, he insisted that trade unionism needed to be extended across the empire. He similarly outlined how when the interests of the government are at stake, they can act quickly, as in the passing of the defence regulations, a contrast to investigation of colonial conditions by royal commissions, which take years to accomplish. The detailed accounts of these meetings are found within special branch reports, and revealed that the British government was concerned about anarchist meetings and the anti-imperial figures that were speaking at them. Later in September 1942, Jones spoke again at a public demonstration organised by the anarchist group in support of the Indian struggle against British imperialism. He stated that the interests of the working class, whatever its race, colour or creed, was everywhere the same, and he appealed to the British workers to support the struggle of the Indian people and the coming struggle of the workers in other parts of the empire. By relaying his experiences of working in ports around the world, Braithwaite was able to directly inform listeners of the reality of colonial conditions within the British Empire, something which was a central component to anarchist anti-militarism during these years. By relaying information about the conditions of workers in colonial countries and the authoritarian manner in which the British Empire was run, the anarchist and anti-imperial speakers were able to question the supposed democratic fascist juxtaposition that was dominating discussions around the war. In October 1944, Jones passed away, and an obituary was written by Matt Kavanagh, an Irish Liverpudlian anarchist. In this obituary, he states, "All revolutionary workers will share in our sorrow at the death of our militant fellow worker, Chris Jones. His death is a great loss for the militant labour movement." Jones's legacy highlights the profound impact that anti-imperialist activists had within the anarchist movement during the war, shaping a critique of militarism and challenging prevailing imperialist narratives. Despite the recent transnational turn in the scholarship on anarchism, existing studies of the British anarchist movement continue to underplay the importance of imperialism in shaping anarchist positions and tactics. Regardless of this, it becomes evident that imperialism played a pivotal role in informing anarchist ideas about war, the state, and international solidarity. While traditional narratives of European anarchism have largely neglected the topic of imperialism, it is essential to acknowledge the influence of imperial dynamics on anarchist movements, particularly during critical historical moments such as the Second World War and its aftermath. Moreover, the exclusive focus on British anarchists within anarchist scholarship highlights the need to challenge exclusionary narratives and incorporate diverse perspectives into the discourse. By expanding the scope of analysis to include the interactions between anti-imperialist and anarchist thinkers, a more comprehensive understanding of anarchist history emerges, one that acknowledges how marginalised voices actively shaped anarchist resistance to war. Similarly, by sidelining or marginalising anarchism within anti-imperial historiography, scholarship within this field misses key points of convergence between anti-imperialists and the British left. As has been demonstrated, including anarchism in this field of study provides a more comprehensive understanding of anti-imperial opposition to the Second World War. As Kesua John contends, the marginalisation of anti-imperialists that opposed the Second World War has been part of the strange silences of history that robs us all of a fuller understanding of the past and condemns us to an infinitely intellectually narrower present and future. Highlighting this past and bringing attention to its convergence with the movement that Martin Seidel has argued was the only major school of European socialist thought that remained anti-war, is essential to providing a fuller understanding of anti-imperialist and anarchist resistance during this critical period. An exploration of the archives and publications in war commentary underscore the active involvement of anti-imperialist actors in anarchist spaces. These actors not only provided vital information about colonial conditions, but also contributed to shaping anarchist critiques of imperialism and its connection to capitalism. By highlighting the brutal nature of imperialism and challenging the fascist democratic binary, anarchists aim to expose a perceived hypocrisy in supporting the war effort under the guise of defending democracy. The anarchist critique of British imperialism during the war era aimed to dismantle the myth of democratic imperialism and was crucial in forging solidarity with anti-imperialist struggles worldwide. Within this context, activists from the colonies played a committed role in both publications and public meetings.
Thank you for listening. To help others find anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.